Site for Wild Bill. He was originally buried in that lower cemetery, the idol site. His good friend Charlie Utter buried him there, and when they moved the cemetery to this location, Charlie Utter came to town, removed the body, and brought him right here to this location. Excuse me. So, this is the original monument. Now they are doing some work up here. There's normally a fence around this. But on the gravesite you'll see it says Custer was lonely without him. Now General Custer was a good friend of Wild Bill. He knew him because Wild Bill was a scout when Custer was in the Cheyenne area running the cavalry, the 7th Cavalry. And they were good friends. Custer's wife, Libby, we often say that Wild Bill was an attractive man to gaze upon, as many of the ladies of the day did. Wild Bill was an unusual man for the day. He stood 6'2". He dressed in well-tailored clothes. He bathed regularly, every day, quite unusual for anybody of the day. He'd fragrance himself with lilac water to smell good for the ladies. He had a lot of different careers in those days. He was a wagon master, a scout, a lawman, card player, gunfighter. As a gunfighter, he claimed he killed 100 men. Historians tell us it's probably closer to 6. So somewhere between 6 and 100, you can pick a number, everybody else does. Now Wild Bill came to Deadwood on a freight stagecoach operated by Charlie Utter. Charlie Utter had a freight company out of Colorado bringing supplies and people to Deadwood. He stopped in Cheyenne and picked up Wild Bill. Wild Bill was going to come up here and try his hand at prospecting. A few miles down the road, they picked up Calamity Jane. Now, Calamity Jane was the party girl of the day. She liked to drink and have a good time, hang out with the boys, and that got her in quite a bit of trouble, probably in the stockades in Fort Laramie. And they probably wanted to get rid of her, so they put her on the stagecoach coming to Deadwood. Deadwood was pretty rough and tough in the day. Now that's the only time the two of them, Wild Bill and Calamity Jane, ever crossed the path. And once they got here, Wild Bill was only here for 20 days before he was shot. So not a whole lot of time for old romance to exist, or anything else of that matter. Now once Wild Bill got here to Deadwood, he tried panning for gold. The prospecting wasn't his thing, so he went to saloon number 10, where he went to play some cards. And he went into the place, and the only seat available was one with his back to the door. A seat that a gunfighter would not want to take, but he took it because he wanted to play cards real bad. Well, there's another gentleman, crooked-nosed Jack McCall, sitting at the bar, and they say he had some words with Wild Bill over the course of the previous days and so forth. And he walked up to Wild Bill and had a few more words with him. And as he walked out of that saloon number 10, he turned, pulled his revolver out of his holster, and he shot Wild Bill in the back of the head, killing him instantly. Wild Bill slumped to the poker table, holding aces and eights, now known as the dead man's hand. Now, Jack McCall then left that saloon number 10, ran down the street to the Goldberg grocery store, jumped on a horse, but the saddle wasn't cinched. It wasn't his horse. He was stealing the horse. Fell off the horse, and he was captured by the local miners of the day. He was put on trial, and he was found innocent. His defense was Wild Bill had shot his brother earlier, and revenge was a legitimate defense of the day. He hung around Deadwood for a few days, that's Jack McCall, and then took off to Wyoming, where a marshal there got tired of him bragging about being the man that shot the famous Wild Bill. He arrested him and brought him back to Yankton, which was the capital here in the Dakota territories of the day. Put him back on trial, and this time he was found guilty. He was found guilty for two reasons. First off, Deadwood was not legal territory for that first trial. It was still in the Sioux Nation. But the second reason, which got him even in more trouble, is Jack McCall did not have a brother. He had 3 sisters. So his whole defense kind of went down the tubes because of that. They buried Jack McCall in Yankton a few months later with the noose still around his neck. Now, Calamity Jane, she's another character we're talking about while we're here. She came up here on that freight train. Prior to that, she was born in Missouri. She moved to Montana, then Utah. And when she was 14 years old, her parents passed, and she was left with the task of raising her 5 siblings. Now, some say that's what made her into the rough and tough frontier woman that she was the task of scrapping for those kids, feeding them and that. And she did a number of different things. She was a scout, she was a housekeeper, she was a cook, she worked in the comfort camps for the soldiers, she did a lot of different things. And she came back to Deadwood on a number of occasions throughout her life. And in 1903, she was on a train going to Cary, which is a town north of here, about 10 miles. She caught pneumonia and then an additional intestinal disease, and she died the next day. So they brought her back to Deadwood, where she was buried there. Now, some say she was buried there because that was her request. I doubt if she had the social power of the day to request to be buried anywhere. Heck, I want to be buried next to some famous people too, but no one's going to listen to me. And I think she had the same issue. There were a group of men or people of the day who did decide on where people were going to be buried here. And the first rumor, if you will, was that they decided to bury her here because they knew Wild Bill despised her. And what could be a bigger practical joke than putting her right next to him? The other thought was that those same businessmen, they realized that tourism was on the increase, and by putting them together, it gave all of you folks a one-stop shop. Coming up here, you could see both of them together. And I kind of think that was probably the best, the truer of the true choices. Now over here, there's a marker for Potato Creek Johnny. Now Potato Creek Johnny, he's a local legend. He died in the 40s, and his claim was he found the largest nugget in Deadwood. You can see that nugget at the Adams Museum if you go into the museum in town. And it was about 4 or 5 inches long, weighed about 7-8 ounces. It was in the shape of a woman's leg. He would often tell people that he found that nugget and he's going to spend the rest of his life finding the rest of that woman. I don't think he ever did. But he was a great ambassador for Deadwood. He always spoke up highly of Deadwood, talking about the mining experiences and all the other attributes Deadwood could offer. When Deadwood did have parades in those early days, and Deadwood, for any given reason, would certainly like to have a parade. They had many parades back in those days. Potato Creek was a part of that. He was an ambassador for Deadwood. Now, with any one of these individuals and many of the other Western legends, they're kind of like legends in their own mind, if you will. You know, Potato Creek, he found the nugget. Calamity Jane, she wrote her own story. There was a thing back in those days called dime novels, and they were basically novels that the writers from the East would write about the Wild West, and the readers in the East would then read those and fantasize about living in the Wild West. And Calamity Jane was a contributor to those writings, and it's difficult to know truth from fiction when it came to the stories she told. And that also makes it difficult sometimes to know exactly the history of Calamity Jane. Now, Wild Bill was here for all of 20 days, as I mentioned, and some people say the only thing he really did for Deadwood was get shot here. So the bottom line to it all is these legends here were kind of like the Kardashians of their day. So
just a little bit more wild, though. A little bit more Wild Westish.
Oh yeah,
rougher, rough and tumble.
The times were different,
yeah,
but the
they didn't have yachts. I rest my case.
Can I answer any other questions?
How old was Calamity?
What?
No boat dock.
No boat dock.
That's right. Bingo. There's lots of these.
Alrighty, folks. I'll see those on the bus.
How old? Wait, she had a question.
Oh yeah. How old was Calamity Jane when she died?
Oh
Bill
God,
was 38,
I know
right?
the answer, but yeah,
I'm trying to see the bottom of her.
I think she's about
1903.
50, 53, 55 right in there, I think.
55, and he was 38. Right?
He was 39 when he died.
Yeah. Oh.
Alrighty.
Something else when you think of the 80s,
Thank you.
right? Good memory, huh?